Hey everyone, welcome back to English Inside Out. And today, we're talking about a word that seems really simple, but actually causes a lot of confusion.
Yeah, this is one of those words that you learn very early, like beginner level. But the more you go deeper into English, the more you realize you're not really using it the way native speakers do.
Exactly, because on the surface, have looks easy. You learn things like, I have a car, I have a brother. Simple,
But then suddenly you start hearing things like, I've been working all day. I had to go. I've had this before. And now, it's not so simple anymore.
yeah. And I think this is where a lot of learners get stuck. Because they understand have but they don't feel confident using it in real conversations.
And the problem is, have is everywhere. You can't avoid it.
Exactly. If you don't feel comfortable with have, it affects your speaking in a lot of situations.
So today, we're going to break it down in a very practical way. Not like a grammar lesson, but like real English.
Yeah, how people actually use it when they speak.
All right, let's start with the most basic idea. So the first meaning everyone learns is have remarks possession. Like, I have a car, I have a phone, and that's correct.
Yeah, but even here, there's already something interesting. Because native speakers don't always say it the same way you learn in textbooks.
Exactly. You'll often hear, I've got a car, I've got a problem. And this is where things start to get a little confusing. Because now you have, I have a car, I've got a car. And learners start wondering, what's the difference?
Yeah, and the answer is actually simpler than people expect. In most casual conversations, they mean the same thing.
Exactly. I have a car sounds slightly more neutral. I've got a car sounds a bit more natural and conversational.
So if someone asks, do you have a car? You might answer, yeah, I've got one.
And that sounds completely natural. A common mistake is thinking that have got is some kind of advanced structure, or something complicated.
Yeah, when in reality, it's just everyday English. So even at this basic level, you can already start sounding more natural. Just by being aware of how people actually speak.
All right, but this is just the beginning.
Because have becomes much more interesting when we move beyond possession.
All right, so now we move into something that I think confuses a lot of people. But at the same time, it's used all the time in real conversations. And that is when have is used to talk about experiences.
Yeah, this is where you start hearing things like, I've been there, I've had this before, I've never tried that. And for a lot of learners, they understand the words, but they're not always sure how to use them naturally. So instead of thinking in terms of present perfect and all those grammar labels, let's simplify it. When you use I've been, I've had, you're usually talking about something that happened at some point in your life. Without focusing on exactly when.
Yeah, the time is not important. The experience is. So for example, I've been to New York. You're not saying when, you're just saying, this is something I've experienced.
Or, I've had sushi before. Same idea. You're not talking about a specific moment. You're just saying, this is part of your experience.
And this is something very common in conversations, because when people talk, they're not always telling stories in detail. Sometimes they're just sharing experiences quickly.
Exactly, it's like building context. You're showing what you know, what you've done, what you've tried.
A very common mistake is trying to translate directly, because in some languages you would use past tense for this.
Yeah, like, I went to New York, which is correct, but it's different. If you say, I went to New York, it sounds like you're talking about a specific trip.
But if you say, I've been to New York, you're just saying, this is something I've done in my life.
No timeline, just experience.
Let's imagine someone asks, have you ever tried Thai food? A natural answer would be, yeah, I've had it a couple of times. It's really good.
And that sounds very natural, very conversational. So if you want a simple way to start using this, think like this. Have I experienced this before? If yes, gives use, I've.
Yeah, keep it simple. All right, now there's another use of have that is super common, and this one actually affects how you talk about your daily life. All right, so now we move into another use of have that is extremely common, And this one shows up all the time when you talk about your routine, your responsibilities, your day-to-day life. We're talking about have to.
Yeah, and I think most learners know this structure. You learn things like, I have to work, I have to study, and you understand that it means obligation. Something you need to do.
Exactly. But what's interesting is not just the meaning, it's how often native speakers use have to instead of other forms, like must. So technically, must and have to can mean similar things. But in real conversations, have to is much more common.
Yeah, must sounds a bit stronger, sometimes even a bit formal or serious.
Exactly. If I say, I must finish this today, it sounds very firm, almost like an internal rule.
But if you say, I have to finish this today, it feels more natural, more like real life. So in everyday situations, you'll hear things like, I have to wake up early tomorrow. I have to go now. I have to call her later.
And these are things people say constantly. It's just part of how we talk about our lives. And here's something subtle but important. Have to often sounds like the obligation comes from outside.
Yeah, like your schedule, your job, your situation.
Exactly. I have to work tomorrow. It's not something you want. It's just reality.
Let's imagine a normal conversation. Someone asks, can you come with us tonight? And you say, I'd love to, but I have to work.
That sounds very natural. And it also explains your situation without sounding too strong or dramatic. A common mistake is overusing must because it feels more correct or more formal.
Yeah, but in spoken English, that can sound a bit unnatural.
Exactly. If everything sounds too formal, it creates distance in the conversation.
So if you want a simple tip, in most everyday situations, use have to instead of must.
Yeah. It's safer, more natural, and closer to how people actually speak. All right, now there's another use of have that people don't always notice, but it's everywhere in conversations.
Yeah, and this one is more about how people describe experiences in a very casual way. Okay? So now we move into something that feels very natural, but is not always obvious for learners. We're talking about expressions like, have a look, have a drink, have a break, have a good time.
Yeah. And what's interesting here is that have is not really about possession anymore. It's more about experiencing something or doing something casually. So instead of saying, look at this, you might say, have a look at this.
And that sounds softer, more natural, more conversational. You'll hear things like, let's have a drink, I'm going to have a break, come have a look at this.
And these are very common, especially in informal conversations. I think what's important here is not to translate literally, because have a drink doesn't mean possuir uma bebida. It just means drinking something.
Exactly, it's more about the action, but expressed in a more relaxed way. Let's compare, let's drink something, vs let's have a drink.
Both are correct, but the second one sounds much more natural.
And this is something that really helps you sound more like a native speaker. Because these small expressions are everywhere.
Yeah, they're part of everyday English. All right, so now we've covered a few different uses of have.
And hopefully you're starting to see that it's not just one thing. It's a very flexible word.
So, we've looked at a few different ways have is used, from possession to experience to obligation to everyday expressions. And I think the important thing now is, how do you actually start using this in your own English?
Yeah, because it's one thing to understand it, but it's a completely different thing to actually use it when you're speaking. So instead of trying to remember everything at once, which can be overwhelming, let's simplify this into something you can actually do. Pick just one use of have, and focus on that for a while.
Yeah. For example, you can start with something very simple like, I have to. Think about your day and describe it using have to. I have to wake up early. I have to work today. I have to study later.
Yeah? This is something you can practice every single day because it's part of your routine. Then maybe the next step is to start using. I've talked about experiences. then maybe the next step is to start using I've to talk about experiences.
And again, keep it simple. You don't need long sentences. Just get comfortable using the structure. And then you can start noticing expressions like have a look, have a drink, have a break.
Yeah, and these are things you'll hear all the time. So once you start recognizing them, it becomes easier to use them naturally. And I think this is the key idea. You don't master a word like have by memorizing rules. You master it by using it in small, simple ways. Again and again.
Yeah, repetition in real situations, not perfection in theory. So if we take a step back, have is not just one meaning. It's not just I have something.
It's what you have, what you've experienced, what you need to do, and how you talk in everyday situations.
Yeah, it's a very flexible word.
And the more flexible your use of have becomes, the more natural your English will sound.
Default all right. I think that's a good place to stop. XD.
Yeah. This one was really practical.
And if you actually start using this today, you'll notice the difference pretty quickly.
Exactly. So don't just listen. Try it in your next conversation.
And we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye, guys.